Her shift was ending in 10 minutes. Antonia nervously glanced at the clock. Her daughter and husband were waiting for her at home, but her last patient was late. She really didn't want to be late getting off work. Her husband already constantly complained and was jealous of everything. The young woman impatiently tried to read the patient's last name, illegibly written by the previous shift. She had already cleaned and tidied up everything after her work. The sink was shining, used needles, syringes, bandages, cotton balls, and plasters were collected in large black trash bags. Only the last patient was left, and he was late. Antonia looked at the door with frustration, put her hand in her pocket, and took out her keys. Exactly at 6, she decided she wouldn't wait and would close the office. It was his fault, and no one was going to pay her for overtime anyway. It was almost dark outside. She took her time getting dressed, thinking he might still show up, but he didn't. She closed the clinic and decided to stop by the store for groceries on her way home. It was already getting dark. Antonia loved twilight, it was the most mysterious time of day. The only downside in their village, lost in the forest far from the highway, was the poor street lighting. But a bright moon was shining in the sky, so the way home was well lit. And just in case, she always had a flashlight in her bag. The clinic was on the outskirts of the village, with only the forest behind it. She had to walk almost a kilometer down the main street through the entire village to get home. Antonia stepped down the stairs from the porch and nearly jumped in surprise. A huge wolf was sitting by the entrance, glaring at her with its two yellow, flashlight-like eyes. A cold chill ran down her spine. Wolves never came into their village, so residents walked the streets at night without fear, and no one was afraid to go into the woods for mushrooms and berries. The paths of people and predators rarely crossed. Stop! Antonia's mind flashed. Her father. Her father, who lived in the village beyond the forest. A few years ago, he had found a wolf cub in the forest, either injured or sick. He had nursed it back to health. The wolf had stayed with him for a while but eventually returned to its natural habitat, the forest. Where was he now? Meanwhile, the wolf sat still, watching her. Antonia remembered that her father had put a green leather collar on his pet. That was a little over a year ago. Could this be the same wolf? Slowly, so as not to anger the animal, she tried to take the flashlight out of her bag. The wolf didn't move and just watched her with a strange look. He showed no signs of malice or aggression. It was as if he was waiting for something. Antonia shone the flashlight, and sure enough, the animal had the same green collar around its neck. The young woman felt a bit relieved. Her fear for her life took a back seat. Why had the forest creature come to her? And then it hit her. Her father. Something had happened to him, and the wolf had come for help. There could be no other reason. Running home to alert her family would waste time. She went back into her office, grabbed her first aid kit, and rushed outside. The wolf understood and ran ahead, showing the way. There was only one path, through the forest. 2 kilometers along a small but well-trodden forest road that directly connected the village and the town. The bus ran, but not every day, and it was already late. There was no time to look for a car. Every minute counted, and taking the long way around was 50 kilometers. But it was only 30 minutes on this path, and she should be there. Just make it in time, the same thought pounded in Antonia's head like a drum. As she ran, she reminisced. Her whole life flashed before her eyes. She was born and raised in a good, loving family. Her parents adored each other and doted on their daughter. When she decided to work in the village after finishing medical school, they bought a large apartment there with their lifelong savings so their daughter would have her own home. Later, Antonia brought her young husband home. They had a joyful wedding. Everything seemed fine at first, but then Antonia's mother fell ill. She passed away when Antonia was 7 months pregnant. That's when her father started drinking heavily. She had never seen him like that before. He used to drink only on holidays, just like everyone else, in moderation. Home life turned into a real hell. Eventually, when their daughter was born, Antonia and her husband had a big fight about her father. Her husband shouted something like, "Choose, it's either me or him." Antonia couldn't say anything, she just opened her mouth silently like a fish. Her father heard everything. In the morning, while everyone was still asleep, he packed his things and quietly left for the village, to his old house, which by then was quite dilapidated. At first, Antonia didn't understand where her father had gone, but then she realized he had nowhere to go but the village. She followed him, leaving her 3-month-old daughter with her husband. She cried and begged him to come back. But her father didn't want to disturb her family's peace with his presence. He said he would spend the winter in his old home, and they would see what happens next. Antonia knew that summer was fine there, but in winter, all the neighbors left. The road was covered with snow, and the water in the wells often froze. The house wasn't fit for harsh winters anymore. To keep warm, the stove needed to be stoked almost continuously, which required a lot of firewood. But what about water? Antonia persisted. "I'll melt snow, there's plenty of it here, and it's clean since we're far from the city," her father replied. "Dad, why are you drinking?" Antonia felt sorry for the old man, but she didn't know how to convince him to return home. "I won't any more, Antonia, I promise," the old man said, not looking at her. "I know it's bad. I was so sad after your mother died, may she rest in peace, that life became unbearable. That's why I started drinking. But I won't any more, I promise. But don't try to persuade me, I won't come back home. I'll tidy up here, keep my hands busy, and most importantly, my mind. Don't worry about me, go back to your daughter and husband." Antonia visited her father until the end of winter, bringing him large bags of canned food, grains, and tea. She knew it wouldn't last long and hoped her father would decide to return to the village. But he survived the winter just fine, even stopped drinking completely. In the spring, he found a wolf pup that became his friend and now his savior. Because of the wolf, he again refused to return to the village. "God, just let me be on time," Antonia prayed. The house was cold, and she didn't see her father right away. He was lying on a narrow couch under a pile of blankets and old jackets and sweaters. "Dad, you're alive, thank God," Antonia exclaimed, clapping her hands. "I'm a bit under the weather, my heart's acting up," the old man answered faintly. Without asking any more questions, Antonia took out everything she needed from her bag, measured his blood pressure and pulse, and gave him the necessary injections. Then she stoked the stove, brewed tea with honey, and started making broth, suspecting that her father hadn't eaten for several days. "This can't go on, you'll drive me crazy, you'll break my heart. Pack up, tomorrow you're coming with me, back to your home, it's your home too, Dad. And your granddaughter has been waiting for you. You can even bring your wolf, I'll agree to anything. After all, he's your savior. You know he found me in the village and led me here to help you. All right, Antonia, we'll go home tomorrow. But the wolf lives in the forest now, if he needs me, he'll find me. And I'll come here for the summer, plant a little garden. And I've quit drinking, thanks to him, my gray friend." Father and daughter hugged and cried.